What makes a great exercise for muscle growth? Let's talk about exercise selection, everything you need to know about that. Yeah, that was a horrible intro, but we're running with it. Fuck it. Let's go, baby. Okay, so first of all, what muscle group do we want to train? Of course, we have to figure out this is where we started, right? What muscle group are we trying to train? So let's use the biceps as an example because it's so fucking easy. I'll give a more complex example as well, don't you worry. But let's say we want to train our biceps. So what we have to ask ourselves, what muscle action does this muscle perform? So the biceps, they perform elbow flexion, which is just bringing this part, your forearm, closer to your humerus, your upper arm. Elbow flexion, curls, very, very easy, hopefully. They also do supination and a little bit of shoulder flexion, but you do not need to train those. Obviously, you're going to train shoulder flexion with other things, but if you're training supination, I don't know, man. Yeah, no. Maybe I'll talk about that in this video. I don't really know, but not like supination specifically. But I don't know. Just shut up, Nick. Shut up, please. Please, just shut up. Okay. Anyways, then you have to ask yourself, how can I load this muscle action / what exercise trains this muscle action, and how can I get stronger at performing this muscle action to therefore grow this muscle? So, like I said, if it's the biceps, for example, we know the biceps flex the elbow, so we know we want to do some form of curl variation, right? And we just want to get stronger at some form of curl variation, and that will then grow our biceps, right? Pretty simple concepts here. Now, let's take a bit of a more complex muscle. Let's say the chest, for example, is probably the best example of this because the chest, any movement at the shoulder pretty much involves the chest in some regard. That's not completely true, but the chest does almost everything if you think about it. It does flexion, it does extension, it does horizontal flexion or adduction, depending on what you want to call it. Some people call it horizontal shoulder flexion. I like to call it horizontal adduction. You're adding to the midline of your body is how I like to think about it. Anyways, it also does a bit of rotation and fucking adduction in the frontal plane, like that movement, and like it does fucking everything. So pretty much anytime you're moving at the shoulder joint, it's gonna be doing something. So yeah, so like in that case, are you gonna train every single one of those actions? Now, if you want to have a maximalist approach, then obviously you're gonna try to train as many joint actions as you can, and as opposed to doing maybe 3 sets of like a flat press, you might want to split that up across like 1 set of a flat press where you're doing horizontal adduction, 1 set of a more flexion based press or fly, and then 1 set of a maybe like a pullover or some kind of extension based movement. That's a whole separate argument of like whether you should do that or not. If you're a more of a beginner, which hopefully most of you are, I don't know why I said hopefully, but like I mean that's my target audience kind of. But regardless, like if you're more of a beginner, intermediate, I mean the choice is up to you. And we'll talk about that in a minute of like what exercises are actually worth doing, what joint actions are worth training. That's just something that you got to decide. Theoretically, it will be better to train more joint actions, yes, because you're going to be recruiting and stimulating a wider range of muscle fibers. So let's say you do just like a flat press, which is the only thing that I do for my chest right now. But let's say that's the only thing you do. You might be missing out on some fibers that are exclusive to shoulder flexion or shoulder extension. So maybe some fibers of the upper chest and maybe some fibers of the lower chest. You might be missing out on like the top end of the motor unit pool, those highest threshold muscle fibers. I don't want to get into any of the nerd stuff. I'll probably make a nerd video because I do love that shit and I do have a lot of knowledge on it that I would like to share, but it doesn't really help people that much, I feel like, but that's a whole other story. Anyways, enough of this fucking slide. That's a pretty simple concept. Pick the muscle group, pick the joint actions that this muscle performs, it may be multiple, and then figure out how to load those joint actions and just get stronger at them and bang. Now let's talk about some features of exercise selection. So first one, very big in the fucking science-based sphere, is stability. Now something that people get wrong about this is that stability exists on a spectrum, and theoretically the more stable an exercise, the better it's going to be for muscle growth because you're going to be able to activate more muscle fibers and therefore stimulate more muscle fibers to grow, because muscle growth happens on a muscle fiber level. You can think of this like muscle fibers make up a muscle. You can think of that like a basketball team is made up of players, right? It's not just the team. It's made up of individual players. And that's the same thing with your muscles and your muscle fibers. The muscle fibers are the individual players that make up the whole team. So the more stable a movement is, the more muscle fibers in the target tissue you're trying to train that you can theoretically stimulate, because you won't have to allocate that central motor command, which is basically the it's how your body and your brain recruits and actually activates these muscles, these muscle fibers specifically. And it has a limited amount. So, like, I can get into the whole thing of how you hit failure on an exercise. I don't really want to explain that right now. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty low energy right now. I've started a cut, by the way, which I'll probably talk about in another video. None of you guys care about me, but maybe I'll talk about that in another video. But anyways, yeah, I could talk about all this shit for hours, as you guys know, every single time. And I need to go home yet again. If you guys remember a couple videos back, I was like recording this video until like 8 p.m. and then I didn't get back home till like 10 or something. It's only like 3 right now, but I don't want to get caught in the fucking 5 p.m. traffic on the fucking Merit. And I'm destined to now, so looks like I'm gonna have to stay the night or something. I don't know. Anyways, you guys don't care, like I said. So let's fucking get back to business here. So stability exists. Okay, it exists on a spectrum, and there's a lot of things you need to consider here. Like, you could theoretically make an exercise super stable, but is that juice worth the squeeze? That's the question you got to ask yourself, and we'll get into that later with the ease of setup and other practical considerations like that. But in general terms, the more stable an exercise, the easier it's going to be to perform, and the less coordination demand you're going to have, and theoretically the more muscle fiber activation you're going to get, so therefore the more muscle growth you're going to get. So we want to choose stable movements, relatively stable movements. Now, it doesn't have to be like we are literally locked in like a fucking isokinetic biodex machine, and like it's impossible to move at any other joint. But when we're performing exercises, and I can make a separate video about exercise execution, but let's use the bicep example. We're trying to move at the elbow joint, right? Because we're trying to train elbow flexion, the curling motion. So we don't want to see much movement at the shoulder, at the torso, or anything like that. We just want to see the elbow joint moving, right? We want to see every other joint as still as possible. So you could do things to make that easier. Like, you could, if you've seen like some of the crazy setups that people do, you could do shit like that. But if you guys see my training, I don't do any shit like that at all. Because it's just, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. But again, you can do what you want. But like a simple example of this would be like, instead of doing a incline dumbbell press, maybe you opt for a machine incline press. Now, again, you could argue about how much of a difference that's going to make, and it's going to depend on your coordination levels, how strong you are, like so many different things. So that's why none of this shit is black and white, unfortunately. I wish it was, and everybody wishes it was, but it's not. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. Pretty simple concept. The more stable a movement is, the better it's going to be for muscle growth, generally speaking. So yeah. Then, very similarly, we have the ease of execution. So again, the more stable it is, the easier it's going to be to execute. The less coordination demand there's going to be, so therefore the less mental effort you have to put towards actually coordinating the movement is a simple way to put that. Because the more mental effort you have to put to that, it's going to take away from your actual muscle growth, in simple terms yet again. So yeah. So like, you may not want to do a barbell back squat because that's a pretty hard movement to execute. There's a lot of different moving parts you have to account for. Your center of mass, how much torso lean you have, your ankle position, your foot pressure, your freaking so many different things, dude. Like, so you can either do that, or you can throw yourself on a fucking hack squat, and you still have to worry about things like foot pressure and other things like that, but it's just way easier. There's way less of a like balance demand, and yeah. And another way that you can argue this is that like the first couple of weeks of doing some of these harder movements are going to mainly be just you getting better at the movement, that coordination side of it, and not actually muscle growth, because you're not really going to be able to activate the highest threshold motor units, which just means like the muscle fibers that have the most potential to grow. So yeah, but eventually you're going to get better at these movements, right? So as you get more coordinated, as you get more advanced, I feel like this matters less and less, but it's still something that like I personally don't want to do something that's just harder to execute. Like, I don't want to do I was going to say I don't want to do a stiff leg deadlift when I could do like a 45-degree extension, but that's not really true, because I actually like stiff leg deadlifts. But stiff leg deadlifts are going to be harder to perform because in a 45-degree extension, your knees and your legs are basically locked in place, which is kind of like what I was saying with the stability thing. As opposed to a stiff leg deadlift, it's going to be very easy to bend at the knee more as the weight gets heavier, and to have other problems. So yeah, like that's a very simple example of it. And then there's obviously other considerations, like there is the loadability of the exercise. So how loadable is this exercise? Can I actually load it and progress it, or am I limited in the amount of weight that the machine has? Like, am I going to full stack it and I can't gym pin it or add weight to it or make it harder in any way? Usually you can work around these things. You can do it unilaterally, which we'll talk about later, or you can add weight to the pin. You don't even need a gym pin necessarily. You can usually add weight to it like that. You can add resistance bands. You can increase the moment arm somehow to make it harder. Like, there's a lot of different things you can do in that regard, but still, there's like the adductor machine is a very classic case where most people are just going to be too strong for this. And now the problem with that is that like there's not many substitutions for training your adductors because there's just not that many machines or anything that trains adduction. You could do it on like a cable. I'm sure you guys have probably seen that. You could put like a cuff on your ankle and kind of train adduction that way. But again, there's ways around this. Usually you can gym pin, you can have somebody else resisted, you can add bands, whatever. But it is something to consider. If the movement isn't loadable for whatever reason, then it's probably not a good idea to use it, because maybe you're going to have to do like 20, 30 rep sets and you can't actually progress it because there's no ceiling for progression because you're already at the top of it, you know what I mean? So it's a very important consideration. Again, there's usually ways to work around it, so it's not that like detrimental or anything, but yeah. And then we have the resistance profile. Now, this one is very much a spectrum and not like a black and white thing at all, because it's going to depend on the exercise, the muscle group, the fucking insert any other thing you want. Like, in most cases, generally speaking, a descending resistance profile, which means it starts off heaviest and gets easier. You can look this up. I should have put some graphs, but descending basically meaning like it starts the most challenging and then it gets easier as you move through the rep. So like if we're doing a bicep curl, it's hardest at the bottom at full elbow extension and gets easier as you flex the elbow, which theoretically may be better for the bicep specifically based on their internal moment arm, which is basically like one of the considerations for how much leverage they have to produce force, basically. So we have like one paper that shows that they seem to have the longest moment arm near full elbow extension, and therefore you can make the argument that it would be smart to have the most resistance there because the muscle is strongest there, and therefore your brain will try to allocate the most effort and central motor command in that range, and therefore you would get the most growth. Now, does it actually play out that way? I don't know. That's the whole like neuromechanical matching debate. If you guys are tapped in any of that, if you're not, don't worry about it at all. The average lifter or the intermediate lifter does not really have to worry about this. I don't even worry about it in that sense, like the trying to match it to leverages, because there's so many different things that like people don't really understand with that, and that like it's way more complicated than you think. And I'm not going to pretend like I understand it fully because I don't. There's people who have PhDs in biomechanics and that are 10 times smarter than me that like will tell you all the problems with that model. But there is some truth to it, and there is some application to it in some cases, I think. A good example of this is, and that contradicts the descending resistance profile generally being the best approach, is with the glutes. We have a good amount of research, like a lot of research, that shows that the glutes seem to produce their most force at what's called 0 degrees of hip flexion or hip extension, basically a neutral hip position. So like when you're standing up, you're just standing upright, you're not flexing at the hips or extending, or hyperextending, I should say. So like at 0 degrees of hip flexion, it seems to be where they're strongest. That is like lockout on a hip thrust, you can think about, or on a squat. The squat, there wouldn't be much resistance because there's going to be almost no moment arm because the line of force is going to go directly through your body, but whole nother story. But with something like a hip thrust, a glute bridge, whatever, it's going to be good because it's usually hardest at lockout, which is where we want to train the glutes to theoretically get the most growth. So in that case, you would want a ascending resistance profile, which means it gets harder as you go through the movement. Now, as I was saying, generally speaking, descending resistance profiles are just more enjoyable, to be honest, is the main thing, but also in line with the length-tension relationship. A majority of muscles, again, there's exceptions for sure, are typically going to be strongest in the mid to lengthen range. So again, using the biceps, for example, to be at maximum length, you would need to also extend the shoulder because the biceps attached to the shoulder joint, they are biarticular, meaning they attach to two joints, the elbow and the shoulder. So you need to extend at the shoulder as well. But when your elbow is fully extended, they're going to be in a more lengthened position. And I could explain like the whole length tension relationship and why muscles are typically going to be able to produce more tension at longer lengths. Now, again, you could argue about this, and there are arguments about this, but basically there's a combination of both passive tension and active tension. Active tension is what comes from the cross bridges of actin and myosin, which are the actual functional proteins that cause muscle contraction. So like when I'm doing this, what's actually happening inside your muscle fibers is there's these two contractile proteins. There's actin and myosin. Now, how do I want to show this? So actin's here, myosin's here. Myosin kind of looks like a golf club, and basically when like your brain sends that signal and calcium gets released and all this different stuff, don't worry about it, then myosin jumps onto actin, and then they kind of pull on each other, or more correctly speaking, myosin cocks its head back and basically pulls actin closer to the center of the muscle fiber, and that's what causes this shortening of the muscle. Now, that's the active tension part, and you also have the passive tension, which comes from what do you call that shit? Why am I forgetting? Part of it is the sarcoplasmic reticulum, I believe, generates a decent amount of passive tension. Don't worry about any of this if you don't know. Like, this is all fucking really nerdy stuff that's not really going to make a difference in your training at all, but I just like talking about it, as you can see. But I was about to like just call it there, but I feel like I'm in too deep now. I gotta keep going. There's also the tighten is going to be one of the main ones. Tighten, you can think of it like a spring. So basically when you're lengthening a muscle, it's like a rubber band as well. You're generating more and more tension, and then when you release that, it's going to produce the most force, right? That's basically I should have just led with that. I should have just used that analogy. But that's why at length, in the mid to lengthen range, you're probably going to be able to produce the most force. Yeah. But again, there's no like one size fits all approach for every single muscle group, every single exercise, but this is something you kind of got to play with and see what you enjoy. Again, as I'm trying to say, like ascending resistance profiles are typically just not enjoyable because the movement starts out super easy and you think you have like 10 more, and then you get to the end of the fucking rep and it's fucking 5 seconds just to get like this half inch of range of motion at the top, and then it's like you can do partials, lengthen partials at the end. It just kind of gets messy and just not very enjoyable in most cases. Descending resistance profiles are typically more enjoyable. Again, you could argue about which is actually going to be better for muscle growth. There's no right answer realistically. We don't actually know, probably, I think. I don't think it's going to be much difference, to be honest. But yeah, take with that what you will. I can make a separate video about that if I choose to at some point. I don't really think it's too helpful, but if you guys want that, let me know. But yeah. So hopefully I went through all that stuff, and I'm sure I'll touch on some other things in these next few slides, but here's some decisions to make. So we have bilateral movements, which means both arms at once or both legs at once, and we have unilateral movements, which means one leg at a time or one arm at a time. So there's a couple things to consider here. First of all, there may be some benefit to doing it unilaterally because of what's called the bilateral force deficit, which basically is certain exercises in certain muscle groups. If you were, this is the classic example. If you were to do dumbbell curls bilaterally, so you're doing both arms at the same time, you would most likely be able to use more weight or get more reps if you were to do them alternating or one arm at a time because of what's called the bilateral force deficit, basically meaning that you can produce more force unilaterally than bilaterally. Now, this doesn't always hold true, and you can see this in the research and you can see it practically speaking. There's going to be certain exercises in certain muscle groups where you will be able to do more than half. So let's say you're doing 200 pounds on a leg extension with both legs, you're going to be able to do more than 100 pounds on each leg, and therefore you would be producing more force with each leg, and therefore you would be seeing the bilateral force deficit. Now, there's going to be certain people in certain exercises where that's not the case, and you're actually going to be weaker, where if, let's say we use the 200-pound example again, where now you can only get 90 pounds with each leg. Why this is, there's a lot of different things going on physiologically that could explain this, but it kind of comes back to, like, based on what we think, it seems to come back to the whole idea that I was explaining before about how we reach failure based on, like, having a limit to how much mental effort and central motor command we can actually send. And when you have to send to more muscle mass in two different limbs, two different muscles, you're gonna reach that limit sooner, most likely, as opposed to if you just had to send it all to one, you know? It doesn't really play out like that in a lot of cases, as I was saying, but again, you could test this out yourself. Try doing your normal set of bilateral dumbbell curls to failure. And then I bet if you start alternating after that, you can get a couple more reps and you're going to be like, holy shit, that's pretty fucking cool. It is pretty cool. But again, well, so theoretically, you would be getting more growth with the unilateral movement, right? Because you're going to be getting more muscle fiber activation and therefore more muscle growth. Now, again, does it play out like that? I don't know. There's also practical considerations here. Biggest one is probably time management. Like, I know me personally, I dislike unilateral movements a lot, to be honest, in most cases just because they take more time. Think about it, it's twice the amount of time as doing bilaterally, especially if you're resting between, which you should be in most cases. How long you need to rest between is going to depend on the exercise, and I can make a video about that. I think I'm making a short form video about that very soon, like in the next few days, possibly today, whenever this video drops. I'm not sure. I forget what my schedule is looking like, but yeah, so I'll touch on that in that video. But yeah, so there's that. There's the time management thing. It's just going to take longer in most cases. Whether or not you want to do that, it's up to you. Now, I will say, practically speaking, you can make the argument that it would be better to do a unilateral movement at the end, because as you move through a workout, you're going to be more and more fatigued, right? There's going to be more and more fatigue mechanisms present, and therefore you're going to have probably the least amount of muscle fiber activation and the least force output, the least strength on the later exercises in your workout, right? So to kind of compensate for that, you can then do a unilateral movement, which is going to allow you to get a little bit more muscle fiber activation, motor unit recruitment, etc. It's the same thing. So it could be smart to use it in that way as like a compensatory mechanism to kind of offset the negative effects of fatigue. Or you could use it if you wanted to prioritize a certain muscle group or a certain exercise. So if you really wanted to grow your biceps, then maybe doing a unilateral curl variation at the start of your workout is going to be smart. But again, you have to account for the fact that it's probably going to be slightly more fatiguing because you're doing more sets overall. How much of a difference is it going to make practically? Probably not much, realistically. But again, it's just something you have to try. And it's just cool to think about and understand. Because like these little differences can add up over time. That's the whole kind of thought process behind like science-based lifting. I'll talk about that in another video. But another thing to consider here is positioning. Certain movements are just going to feel better unilaterally. You can maybe like rotate your torso on like a preacher curl is a good example. Bilateral preacher curls are typically kind of awkward. You have to kind of force your shoulders into a weird position, and like maybe it doesn't line up properly based on your limb lengths and your structure. So you doing it unilaterally just gives you more freedom. You can kind of rotate away from it and therefore not have to be in like a certain degree of rotation at the shoulder, just to make it more comfortable, etc. So that's a very important consideration. Also, like something like a lat row, like a sagittal lat row, you'll probably see a lot of people do those unilaterally. It's just because you can typically position yourself better. You can kind of brace with your opposite hand and lean back and really align it better, like your trunk position, your torso position, and also aligning like the line of force through your arms that you're not getting more biceps, etc. That's a little bit of a fucking advanced stuff there, but yeah, it's just something to consider. Certain movements are just going to feel better unilaterally. Some are going to feel worse unilaterally. Leg extensions are a great example. I know I fucking hate unilateral leg extensions. Most people agree on that, I think. Let me know in the comments if you agree. They're just uncomfortable for whatever reason. And they also just suck because leg extensions already suck enough, and now you have to do twice the amount of sets, so fuck that. But again, leg extension machines are typically pretty light, but most people also ego lift those. Like fucking a couple months ago, I was stacking plus like gym pinning a leg extension. Now I'm not even at the stack, and I'm stronger and bigger now. I'm just actually doing the movement properly, and I have a seat belt, and I don't move at the hips, and I control it better, and I don't use momentum and all this stuff. But whole nother story. If you want a video about that, about exercise execution, ego lifting, etc., I'm happy to make that. I believe next video I'm going to make is I'm going to walk you guys through my workout, kind of like Keenan does. Shout out Keenan. No way he's watching this. Yeah, I know he doesn't watch these videos, he said, but I love him, and I've been watching all his fucking shit recently. I'm not going to lie. He's been inspiring me. I want to do the same thing. I want to teach you guys. I've learned a ton about exercise execution in the past few months working with Declan. If you don't know, Declan's my coach. I've learned a ton from him. He's the fucking man. Can't recommend him enough. Anyways, he's taught me a ton about exercise execution, and I've spent a lot of time like trying to understand that better and get better at that. So I'd love to help you guys out with that, and I plan to. And I believe I posted a poll on my story, my Instagram story, of what video you guys wanted to see this week, and I believe that one might have won actually, but too late, so fuck you. But yeah. So then we have multi-joint versus single joint. Now, this is a bit of this is a controversial one for sure. It's kind of similar to this unilateral versus bilateral, where theoretically the single joint movement is going to be better, quote unquote, because you're going to have more muscle fiber activation because you have to allocate less of that effort and central motor command to more places. You have to allocate it to less places now. So let's say you're doing a chest press. What muscles, what joint actions are we training there? Let's start with that. So we're doing some horizontal adduction, probably some shoulder flexion as well. We're also doing some elbow extension, right? So what muscles are going to be trained here? We have the chest, obviously, but we also have the triceps. So you can make the argument that theoretically a fly where you're not moving at the elbow and you're only moving at the shoulder joint and therefore only training the chest is going to theoretically be better because you're not going to be using the triceps. Now, most people aren't going to get much triceps in their presses anyways. If you have your wrist and your elbow stacked, the line of force is essentially going to be going straight through your hand, and therefore there's going to be almost no moment arm at the elbow joint, which means there's going to be almost no challenge at the elbow joint, and therefore your triceps aren't actually going to be working that much. Yeah, I can make a separate video about that, but that essentially dictates how hard our muscles have to work is the moment arm, the distance between the axis of rotation and the line of force. I can draw that up and stuff. I just made a reel about that, so go watch that. It's like the guy, the jackass fucking British guy who's like, stop doing your biceps on the same day as your back day if you want to grow your biceps. And I'm like, nah, dude, you're fucking stupid. Okay, shut up, dude. But yeah, so theoretically, the single joint movement is going to be better than the multi-joint movement for that reason. But again, how this actually plays out practically, I don't know. And we do have some research to show that, like, both ways. You can almost always find research to support both arguments for, like, anything, which is why understanding physiologically what's happening is very important. But again, understanding physiologically what's happening only means so much if it doesn't actually have any practical application. But that's a whole nother argument that, like, that's the argument pretty much. That, like, that's like bro science versus, or like evidence-based versus mechanism-based, science-based, whatever you want to call it. Like, that's the whole argument, but whatever. So there's merit to both. Compound movements can be good because they can train multiple muscles at once and therefore save you time. Maybe beginners, you can make the argument both ways that for beginners it makes more sense to just focus on multi-joint movements because they maybe don't have access to the higher threshold muscle fibers that would actually benefit from doing more isolation type movements. But you could also make the argument that doing the isolation movements earlier is going to be better because, one, you're going to get coordinated at them faster, and you're then going to be able to actually access more of those muscle fibers quicker and therefore be able to get more of that growth. So you can make the argument either way. I didn't really organize my thoughts here at all in terms of like what I want to say about this, so I'm trying not to yap too much about this, but clearly it's not working. But like, again, there's no right answer of which one you should do. It's a matter of testing it out, seeing what you enjoy, and we'll talk about that in a second with the more practical considerations. But yeah, like in most cases, you want to isolate the muscle and do, like, if you want to grow your biceps, you don't want to just do pulling movements because, again, they're probably not going to get worked that well anyways. But even if they were, you'd probably want to isolate them as well and get more muscle fiber activation, right? Now, it can sound hypocritical for me to say that and then say that, like, all you need for your chest is a flat press, one that isn't single joint and there's other muscles involved, etc. But again, you're most likely not getting much tricep involvement in that. And yeah, we can go down that rabbit hole, but fuck you, I don't have the energy for it. If you can't tell, I'm at that point now where just talking destroys my energy, dude. I can't do it. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I'm fucking introverted, I don't know. Or I'm just fucking a fat chud. But yeah, I'm cooked. I'm trying here though, guys, I'm trying. So, practical considerations now. Woo! Wake up, buddy. Let's go. Okay, sorry for that jump scare. This is what I do though. This is how I get myself psyched up to keep fucking grinding because we don't give a shit how we're feeling. We don't care about the how tired we are. We just fucking grind, buddy. But we have the ease of setup, which I was alluding to before with the whole stability thing. Like, you don't want to do this crazy setup that's going to take fucking, you have to get like 10 bands and multiple seat belts and all this crazy stuff and do all this stuff. Like, again, that's going to be up to you of how much effort you actually want to put into that. Like, I use a seat belt on my leg extensions, my leg curls, and I think it makes it a lot better. And if you don't want to do that, if you think that's doing too much, I think you probably need to drop your ego, because the reason you probably don't want to do it is because you don't want to look stupid or you want to look science-based or some bullshit, but that's just your ego. But if it actually is that you just don't want to fucking have to carry one in your bag, you don't want it to spend the 2 seconds that it takes to set it up, then by all means, you do you. But yeah, like, that's just an important thing to consider. Like, if I have to load up 8 different plates and waste fucking 10 minutes doing that and warming up and gathering all the plates across the gym, like, I'm going to be way less motivated to do that exercise versus if I can just do like a pin loaded machine and not have to do any of that. Like I'm taking the pin loading machine almost every day of the week. Obviously, assuming there's the other variables are somewhat good. Like again, there's going to be a trade-off in a lot of cases, but that's a very important consideration and very overlooked consideration, I think. Like I know the time that I have to work out every day is pretty limited, and I don't want to spend 2-3 hours in the gym. I want to get in, get out. My workouts are already long enough. I'm doing full body right now. It takes like an hour and a half a lot of the time to work out. It's already long enough. I don't need more time and effort and energy that I don't have to put towards just setting up a movement when I could just do one that's easier to set up. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Then we have enjoyment. Now that can go along with the ease of setup. That can go along with the resistance profile, if it's single joint or multi-joint, if it's bilateral or unilateral, etc., etc. Which is why there's no one right answer here, and there's going to be trade-offs, and a lot of it just comes down to what you prefer, what you enjoy, what you're actually going to stick to and be motivated to do, and what you're actually realistically going to be able to do for the foreseeable future. And I'll talk about that in a second, but that's a little bit of a separate concept. But enjoyment is extremely important. If you hate I'm trying to think of an exercise that I hate. What do I hate? There's a fucking lot, I feel like, but now I'm blanking, of course. I hate shoulder presses a lot of the time for a variety of reasons, but I hate those and we chalked them. It's also because I just don't have the energy to be doing so many different exercises, and don't worry about that right now. I'm not saying you should do that. I would do a shoulder press for most people if you want to get like the best results possible for your shoulders. I would do a shoulder press, but I hate those and I'm not motivated to do them, and I don't want to do them long term, so I don't do them. Simply speaking. But yeah, so that's an important consideration. Your motivation is very important to how much effort you can put out. There's a direct link between that and the actual amount of muscle fiber activation that you're going to get, and therefore the amount of growth you're going to get. So it's pretty important. You shouldn't overlook it. I think I'll make a separate video about that. That's a good idea, actually. I'm going to write that down. Hold up. All right, I'm fucking cocked here, boys, but let's keep going. We're almost done. We're actually at the end, so it's going to be all good. It's going to be okay. I don't know. So, as I was alluding to before, are you realistically going to do this movement for the foreseeable future, or are you just going to do it for like a couple sessions and then chalk it and move on to the next one? And yeah, whatever. Like, this is important because essentially, as I was explaining, different exercises are going to activate and stimulate different groups of muscle fibers. So, for example, if I do a more upper chest biased press or fly where my elbows are more tucked in and I'm doing more shoulder flexion, I'm going to be training a specific region of the chest, like the upper chest, and more specifically, specific muscle fibers within the chest that I'm not really going to be training with my other movements, like my fucking regular pec deck or regular flat press. Now, there is going to be a lot of overlap, and so yeah, there's going to be overlap. You can think of it like a Venn diagram where there's overlap in the middle. Those are the fibers that are going to be trained with both exercises, and then there's the fibers that are exclusive to each exercise. So if you were to do and add in this upper chest press or fly, whatever, you would be training now these exclusive fibers that you weren't training with any of your other movements, which is a good thing, right? That means we're going to get more growth and more areas as well. So that's a good thing. But if you stop doing this movement, then you stop getting those adaptations. You stop stimulating those muscle fibers, and they're going to shrink if they're not stimulated. So if you're only going to do this movement for a couple of weeks and then you're going to chalk it, then you've essentially kind of wasted your time. Now you can make the argument of if it was actually a waste of time, but physiologically speaking, theoretically speaking, it is, because again, you're not going to maintain those adaptations. So what was the point? So when you're adding in new exercises to your rotation, you need to ask yourself this question and really be honest with yourself. Are you actually going to do this movement, realistically speaking, for the foreseeable future? Or are you just going to do it for a couple of sessions and then fucking get bored of it and then chalk it and then just waste your time, essentially? Now, this isn't to say that like you can never try new exercises or do new movements and like it's a complete waste of your time and what are you doing? Like, no, obviously, like enjoy your training, yeah, and like it's it's totally fine to do that. But if your goal is to like get the best results possible, then it's just something very important to consider. So like, when I go to a new gym, for example, maybe I'll split up my volume across like multiple different exercises that I typically wouldn't do. Like maybe I would do an incline press that I don't typically do. But I know, because I understand the physiology, that I'm not really going to get much growth from that. But obviously that's not the point. I'm just training at a new gym for one day. Like I'm just trying to have fun, experience the new machines, whatever. So yeah, that's just something important to consider. And I don't think a lot of people, like people in this niche understand this, but outside of the fucking science-based niche, people have no idea of this concept, and it's a very important one. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. If anything I said doesn't make sense, like always, just comment below, please. I'm happy to explain these things. Happy to make follow-up videos about different things. Maybe make a Q&A, who fucking knows. If you guys actually watch these fucking videos, then maybe I can make more content, and that would be awesome. So please watch them and share them and like and subscribe and comment and fuck you. Okay? There we go. So to recap all this fucking bullshit yap, like always, pick an exercise for the muscle actions that you want to train. Make sure they're loadable, enjoyable, they're relatively stable, they fit your personal goals and preferences. Make sure you're actually going to do them for a long period of time. You're not just going to do them for a fucking couple weeks and then fucking throw them out of the fucking window. And just get stronger at them over time. And that's pretty much it. And obviously perform them well. And I should have mentioned that somewhere, but you can make the argument that your exercise execution is more important than the exercise selection that you have. Now, it's not one or the other. It's both. Both matter a lot. And the exercise selection is going to be a very important factor in how you actually execute the movement. But yeah, you can make that argument, and I can talk about that in a separate video. I definitely will make a separate video about that. But yeah, if you're not executing your movements well and you're just ego lifting and training with horrible technique and you never record your sets, you never look at them in the mirror, or you have a crazy ego and don't realize what you're doing and you're trying to add load every single week and you've never had a coach before and you have no idea how to actually train properly, how to execute movements properly, then none of this really matters. So make sure you're doing all that. Record your sets. I definitely recommend that. I definitely recommend getting a coach. And I'm not just saying that because I do this shit. It doesn't matter if it's me, if it's somebody else. Just get a coach. I thought I knew what I was doing before I had a coach. And then I got a coach and I realized how fucking shit my form was on a lot of movements and how much I was ego lifting. Same thing with before I started recording my sets. You really don't know until you record, so I can't recommend that enough. But yeah, just important considerations there. I believe that's the fucking end. Yeah, so hopefully everything in here made sense. As always, I just winged it and I just kind of spat out the dome. It's hard for me because I don't know who my audience is here. I don't know how much you guys know or care about like the really niche, nerdy science bullshit. Nor do I know how much I want to actually explain that because I'm trying to attract people who are just kind of trying to get jacked and trying to improve their training and who want to coach and who want to work with me, etc. But I'm also just trying to help you guys out and help you guys improve your training. And I do have a very, very much of a passion for that, the nerdy stuff, and using it to actually help you guys out. So it's just hard to kind of balance it all. But yeah, I mean, I could talk about that forever. But yeah, so this is long enough. I need to get home. I need to pack my shit. I'm going home just for the weekend. A little Easter break, and then we got fucking 4 weeks left of the semester, baby. Then we're done. We're donezo. Then we're cool for the summer. Then we're fucking shut up, cornball. Then we're home for the summer, and we're gonna have more time. I'm gonna be pumping out. I don't know how many videos I'll do a week on YouTube. I'm trying to do one a week right now, so I'll probably just keep that up. If you guys actually want to see like a workout or like more of my life, maybe like some car yaps, I don't know what the future has in store, but I would love to make content like that. I just don't want it to get 2 views and waste all my time and effort when I could be spending it elsewhere. But then again, who cares? So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, man, I appreciate you guys. If you made it to the end, comments, shit, because I have to shit my pants right now. But yeah, peace out. Let me know what you want to see next. And yeah, okay.